Hello.
Good evening, Anthony. Tuesday
Hi,
night,
Charlie.
very sunny weather, September tricking us all. Indian
Yeah,
summer.
well, no, it's typical. Summer's over, but it's actually arrived. Only in Britain would summer end, then arrive.
Yeah, I always think it's a myth, actually. Summer is invariably September.
It is.
Nearly always September, summertime.
You're entirely correct, Charles, but never let the facts get in the way of a good myth.
No, exactly. And anyway, so it was a delight to be in your good company at a concert the other night when well, I've never been to the Old Woollen, wonderfully titled Old Woollen, which is, as it suggests, an old mill site in Farsley, which not far from Leeds, but equally not far from Pudsey. Um, and this was the reason for going to this concert was, well, it's a long time since Paddy McAloon has done Prefab Sprout songs. And even who we did go to see, his brother, Martin, um, so 25 years had gone by between Prefab Sprout concerts and then doing what he's done, which is going out as basically Martin McAloon on his
Yeah,
own.
usually in these things, if an original member of the band goes on tour, he gets new musicians and
Exactly.
fronts the band out. That's what
Yeah.
happens. Instead, Martin McAloon, Paddy's brother and bass player, I may remind you, bass player in Prefab Sprout, has
Yes.
gone on tour on his own, him doing all the singing and playing various very nice guitars.
His Les Pauls, his white Grolsches. He.
Gretsch, not Gross. Gross a
I'm so
beer.
sorry. I'm thinking
Gretsch.
of a drink, and I didn't have a drink.
I'd love to
Quite
see.
right. A
I'd love to
Gretsch.
see him play a Grosh.
Yeah,
That'd
and
be
I tell you what,
fantastic.
now that would
Yeah.
it because I mean what he was having to do was pretty difficult anyway. But if it had to play a grolsch bottle as an extra percussion, well, that might have been possible.
And and did you say he was playing a Les Ferdinand?
Playing Les Ferdinand,
Oh well, no, Les Paul. Sorry.
if very good. Now, Graham, so you're quite right. Normally, these situations, it's let's go and see the Birds in Harrogate, where there's only the drummer playing. It's normally like that. But this is one hell of an endeavor that Martin's taken on, to the extent that he's learned 52 prefab Sprout songs, all the lyrics, all the guitar parts. And this is a bass player, and no, nothing derogatory to bass
Yeah.
players, but you know they are the cement mixer, not the diamond finish normally.
Oh, oh, oh. Yeah. I
I
think Paul
don't mean
McCartney might disagree.
very good point, very good point. But you know, we
And
know.
Bruce Foxton.
Yes, he would. But on the other
And Jack
hand,
Bruce. How about Jack Bruce?
yes, you see you coming. Here we go. Okay. The guy from level 42. Yes, fair point, Mr.
Well,
King.
you have to mention him.
Well, I only mention him because you know probably he's from that era, that 80s era of bass players that were very, very prominent. But we found ourselves, Graham, surrounded by die hard, and I think that's the only word for it, prefab Sprout fans, and as it turned out, a young German gentleman who was equally an enthusiast for XTC and Andy Partridge, who happened to be overhearing our conversation. But the level of enthusiasm and knowledge of Prefab Sprout, and he wasn't alone in that, was very apparent at that gig. And that, in some ways, maybe I actually think that eased it to some extent for Martin because
Yeah, well, yeah.
they were on his side, shall we say?
They were very respectful. They were simultaneously eccentric and borderline lunatic, but at the same time full of respect. So they wouldn't just sing along with like big hits. In fact, they didn't really sing along big hits. They
No.
tended to sing along with B-sides, in which they'd also perform unasked for by Martin himself on stage. They'd perform like the backing vocals in the harmonies. It was the most amazing performance by an audience I've ever seen.
And it did. I mean, I think in the end he absolutely loved them doing that as well because you know it's well, he did two sets, not just one, a sort of 45-minute first set that actually went on rather longer than 45 minutes, and a second set that was, I think we were heading home past 11 o'clock, nudging towards 11:15 or whatever. So a gig that had started, I think, what, 8 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, 8 o'clock.
And one point to ask really is, Prefab Sprout commercially perhaps never actually hitting the Andromeda heights, as it were. We all know the King of Rock and Roll huge hit, which is ironically was about being a one-hit pop wonder. But when you see such devotion for high craft, sheer quality songwriting, I think it beats the heart really, because you think, great, actually, someone as exquisitely talented as Paddy McAloon should be celebrated. And how lovely, actually, that it's his brother that's leading those celebrations.
Yeah, you're right, but there's a couple of things there. First of all, if you go by top 40 hits, there are a lot of top 40 hits. If you go by top 10 hits, which is proper hits, they didn't have hardly any. And the weird thing is that they were a pop band, and they were one of the best, possibly the best British pop band of the 1980s, if you forget about XTC and the Smiths. And yet the level of success that such a great pop band and such a great songwriter had just wasn't anywhere near what they deserved. The second thing you got to think as well is that Martin doing this on his own, playing just a guitar and him singing, he definitely run that past Paddy himself. He hasn't just taken it upon himself to go on tour without telling Paddy. So I think the perversity of his performance must have been partly dictated by Paddy himself, who always had a bit of a perverse sense of humor and a slight oddball character, which didn't. He looked like he was a normal chap at all times in Prefab Sprout. They never went in for like wearing silly clothes or doing anything stupid. But he was quite an eccentric quietly, and that sort of came out in Martin's own performance on Sunday night at the Old Woollen move.
He had the wild white hair. He's been an artist for a long time now, and to some extent, obviously, this is something of a sideline and a passion project, if you like, to what has been his main way of being in recent years as an artist. And but he was very engaging with his humor. I think that's always in these scenarios, telling the stories behind the songs, telling us about Paddy, telling us about how people, even like Susie of the Banshees, reacting against Prefab Sprout's pretentious video making, and all those little insights were really welcome for the evening.
He also revealed that he had actually recorded an album not that long ago with his own son, made up of new Paddy McAloon songs at the direction of Paddy, but he's never heard the album since he recorded, and it's obviously never come out. So that was quite a big revelation. So it was almost worth going to the gig just to hear about that. It was quite. If you love Prefab Sprout,
I think he said 10 years ago they did those recordings, and obviously
10 years ago.
He said it was 10 years ago even that they did those. So that sort of sat silently, quietly somewhere in a bat cave somewhere, and you think, well, maybe that's never going to emerge, and it's not, I guess, at Martin's behest as to whether it does. It'll be presumably again at Paddy's behest, because the songs were written by him.
The business side of it as well. Also, the business side, if anybody wants to release it, if anybody can bother releasing it, blah, 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 all those sort of considerations, all the practical considerations. But I thought the actual performance was amazing. And by the second half, I was getting fed up with the chat. Because at the end of the day, although the first half, it really worked, in the second half, you want to hear the great songs. And you still got the chat, which, although it was good chat, it was like, if I went to see Bob Dylan, I wouldn't want Bob Dylan spending like half the show making jokes and chatting about his past. I just wouldn't. So the second half, I was getting slightly weary of the whole approach, although it did work as an approach. But what I thought, some of the versions were astounding. I mean, at first I thought this is like watching a sketch of a car, rather than actually seeing the car. But then I realized that what he was doing by reconstructing the songs purely on a guitar and his voice, you were getting to see the guts inside the songs. So it gave you a real revelation into the interior of the songs and what the component parts were, and how great the construction and the chord sequences and the melodies that Paddy had written mostly all those years ago actually were. So it was quite a revelation at times. So when he played I Remember That off From Lonely Park to Memphis, which isn't usually people's favorite Prefab Sprout song, I remember that the way he did it, you could tell, wow, this is an absolutely magnificent song. It's so well produced on the album, you don't quite realize what a brilliant piece of songwriting it is. But
That's
Martin
interesting because
McAloon's version, you could see
uh,
it was a brilliant song.
and that was a song that benefited from it. A song, probably the best known song of all, When Love Breaks Down, revealed itself to be a much simpler song than would be apparent from the beautiful, ornate version that actually absolutely gets to the hearts. And do you think that was to the song's detriment, or it's just actually that is the surprise that it's by Paddy McAloon's standards, it's a comparatively simple song construction.
Yeah, that was quite surprising. The most ambitious versions that Martin McAloon attempted were usually the best. So he did Technique of Swoon, which isn't an easy song to play, and it was amazing. But then he'd do like Wild Horses of Jordan the Comeback, which is a great track on the album, obviously. And yet it's such a simple song that when he did it, it just sounded like a simple song, and it needed all the production. And without production, it didn't seem such a great song. But the more ambitious, complex songs came across really well. But When Love Breaks Down just didn't, because it came across as too simple. And also, because Martin's 62, the thing you notice about the live renditions now is that what made Steve McQueen album different from the albums after it, which were all fairly successful and are great albums, is that a lot, not all of it, but a lot of Steve McQueen's greatness and its accessibility to a wider audience is based in fact it's driven by emotion, and quite a few of the song's structures are driven by the emotion of the song in a way that albums after that weren't usually. I think it's his most honestly emotional album, and Martin was just couldn't do the emotions because he hasn't quite got the voice. So that also let When Love Breaks Down down.
Yes. There were a couple of revelations that I enjoyed as well. One of which was about recalling when making Swoon, just the youthful joy of a band making music, and that maybe that is never recaptured again. And that's not something that would be alone in this band. That those first surges of pleasure in playing together and performing together and recording together. And he said when going back and playing those songs for the first time in years in order to learn the songs again for the concert, that had been something that it really opened that album up to him again. Just the joy and recalling that joy of we are making an album. We are doing what we've always dreamed. Because he revealed as well, didn't he, that they'd sent off songs at a very young age. They'd sent off songs. Now, which songwriter did they send songs to, Graham?
Brian
Can you
Eno.
remember?
Brian Eno.
So it was Brian Eno.
They sent
Shortly
Brian
after Eno
the
left.
tape when they were about 14, 15.
Yeah. And this was when Eno had left Roxy Music, hadn't he? And they sent songs to him, and which in its own way was very revealing. You know, because of course there is someone who can construct atmosphere in songs as like no other.
Well, at that point though, he'd done "Here Come the Warm Jets."
Yes,
it's almost like proto punk, and he was for a brief time. He was not only flavour of the moment, Brian Eno, and backed by record companies, but he was also sort of like proto punk pop.
Yes,
slightly arty proto punk pop. So he was for a brief period of time, he was actually quite accessible if you were a bit quirky yourself. So I guess that's why they approached him, because at that point he wasn't Mr. Ambient.
No. You also noted, I was trying to remember which band you noted comparisons with in song structures. There were one band that you mentioned, you could see some similarities with Prefab Sprout.
Particularly the earlier songs.
Yes.
Although Paddy's songs are more obtuse and complex usually, but
yes,
the tone of some of them and the chord sequences remind me a bit of the Go-Betweens in the 1980s.
Who are the other great band, albeit Australian as opposed to great pop band as opposed to northeastern English band, who did not have the commercial success that their songs absolutely deserved, and they're the Australian equivalent of that. The other little revelation I really enjoyed, Graham, was his recollections of the relationship with the drummer and how they worked together. Just tell us how he recalled the challenges that he faced in doing that.
Well, when we saw Prefab Sprout a long time ago at St George's Hall in Bradford, I think it was either just before or during the release of Jordan the Comeback album. Although Paddy's brilliant and the band's brilliant, the song's brilliant, I spent most of the gig looking at Neil Connick, the drummer, because he was fantastic. His timing and his touch was so spot on, but in such a effortless, ridiculously easy way. And I wasn't surprised when Martin said on stage that he found it very hard to play with him live because he was basically too good for him. Because Martin just wanted to like bang the tunes out, and Neil was definitely not a banging the tunes out man. So the reason that Martin used to lean back on stage with his head tilted because he was looking at Neil Conti to see if he was in time and where the next beat was, because otherwise it would have all gone wrong.
I think it was moments like that that made me so enjoy the concert. Those little insights that you wouldn't notice otherwise had been the case. I mean, you said you'd noted, Conti's drumming, but actually the thing that was interesting from McAloon's point of view is recalling the challenges in doing it and physically how he had to stand in order to be able to keep the beat with, to keep with the beat that was being or the I think as Martin said, it wasn't on the beat. It was just the T. It was the last of the word beat, as it were.
Yeah.
It was that slight delay that went with it. The question that you ask, which we need an answer to, Graham, really, is: did it make us swoon ultimately as a gig? Obviously, quoting the title of that first album.
I eventually found it slightly irritating, which isn't to knock it really, because it was an amazing night. It's one I'll remember a long time because it was quite unique and quite individual.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't all that I wanted, and some bits were annoying. And then I remember, well, that's what Prefab Sprout were like. They'd give you like 2/3 of the perfect cake, and then they'd put some ingredients in towards the end of the cake that weren't totally suitable or totally easy to digest. So the gig was true to the style and the personality of Prefab Sprout. So in that way, it was a complete success.
I think that's an excellent summation of it. I mean, it's a gig like none other that I've seen, I think it would be fair to say. And I think it's a really brave thing to have done. Not just learning all those songs, but as you like, the musician from the back row suddenly having to be the musician right in the front row. And parts of Martin's character absolutely suited that. But it's the stories that went with it, the revelations about the songs, the revelations within the playing of those songs as well, and I think an appreciation of a band that should have a higher place in the annals of British music history. They absolutely deserve that. I think they've been largely underrated, and Paddy McAloon is perhaps something of you might put him there with, I guess, a band like Squeeze, who actually had more hits than Prefab Sprout, but in terms that they're not rated as highly as a band like the Kinks, for example, for songwriting craft. But McAloon is right up with that, and then you have to add all the technology that went with it as well, which is perhaps what separates from the '60s songwriters and the Brill Building songwriters. There was another layer to his songwriting.
I think of all the great 20th century British pop songwriters, he's been the most underappreciated, and he is the best. And I think that's why that young German kid and his girlfriend, who's from Berlin originally, and he couldn't be more than 20, 21,
no.
why they'd come across all the way to Britain. And they were going to see some British friends as well, but he timed the whole thing so you could see Martin McAloon. I mean, that's amazing to come from Germany to see Martin McAloon, the bass player, playing the songs of Paddy McAloon. So it was just a great night.
And just a word on the venue, Graham, the Old Woollen, which is soon to welcome Pill and John Lydon with the new Pill album. That's quite a coup to have a band like Public Image Limited playing there.
Well, the gigs are run by Chuck Hussain, a great Leeds bloke who led the band Black Star Liner.
Oh yes,
to American Prize nomination in American Prize nomination 1999. So he books the bands, and he could charm, whatever the expression is, off the trees. So I'm not surprised that Pill are playing there, because as a venue, I really liked it, but it's a bit like a more down at heel version of Salt Air, not quite as posh. The same sort of atmosphere, but like without all the purification and middle class tweaking. It's slightly rough and ready, but that gives it its own relaxed charm.
So recommended, if anyone has not been to the Old Woollen at Farsley, Well, it's not too far from where I am speaking, nor too far from where
It's
Graham's
not. It's not.
speaking.
It's not too
So
Farsley, actually, Charles.
it's not too Farsley. That's absolutely absolutely true. Now, talking, if you like, of acts that have got a bit of spikiness about them, which John Lydon has. You went to Leeds Festival, and who you bumped into was the maker of a Leeds album that's probably the best Leeds album of recent years, James Smith of Yard Act, no less. How did you bump into him, and what did you discuss with James Smith of Yard Act?
Well, these days, Leeds Festival, because of the landscape of what youth classifies music now, and
Mm,
also what the music seems like. I mean, things aren't the same as they were 10 years ago.
no.
Never mind 20 years ago when Leeds Festival was quite new. So it's no longer an indie heaven or a rock heaven or a guitar driven heaven. It's got all sorts of music. So
Yeah.
you see a lot of acts that I either don't particularly like or I think are professional and non offensive, but they don't do much for me, like Seagirls or some of the rappers, which are all perfectly fine. But in Sam Fender, he's got some talent, but the acts I like were bands like the Murder Capital in Dublin, who had virtually no great songs but had an amazing stage presence, or
Mm.
even Wet Leg when they had the good songs, or the Last Dinner Party, a newish five-piece female group who dressed in flouncy dresses like they were still in Jane Eyre, but played really great tuneful
Yeah.
pop indie. So I really enjoyed that. But the band I liked best were on first on the main stage, Yard Act, obviously,
Yes.
and I'd
Yes.
seen them a year ago at Deershed on the main stage.
Mm.
And they're so much more of a live act than they were a year ago. James Smith has come on leaps and bounds, is so confident and so outgoing and relaxed being on stage. And also he had a bit of artness. He brought in a bit of Jarvis Cocker artness. So the gig started with the band on stage, but with a lot of mannequins dressed in like clothes from a sort of like 1970s top shop, clothes shop. So it was quite
Mm.
interesting. Then some of them started to move and started to do this cool Jarvis Cocker type dancing. And that carried on for the whole gig as the
Yeah.
band played. So that was interesting. It made me think that Yard Act are like the last line in all those quirky indie bands in Leeds when I was doing Charm in the late 90s, early noughties, who
Mm.
never quite made it, but got played by John Peel and were really interesting bands, more interesting than a lot of the bands that were to follow. So I bumped into James and he said it was great to like be on the main stage because he'd first been to Leeds Festival when he was about 14 or 15, about
Mm.
2006. So to be on the main stage as one of the stars was quite a big deal for him. And I said, well, yeah, but you're the last in lineage. Like you and Ryan, who was in Menace Beach and you were in Post-War Glamour Girls, you're like
Mm.
the last of the line that leads back to the 1990s and the Duchess and Judd as well and John Keenan at Leeds Irish Centre
Yeah.
and the great Leeds indie scene that never quite made it and was eventually replaced by things that weren't quite as good in general. And he seemed quite touched that said that because
Mm.
I didn't just see played a great gig. It's not really me.
So you gave him a traditional Chalmers lecture and a history of Leeds music making and his part in it. How? I mean, I'm interested to know as well as your thoughts on it. Actually,
Yeah,
how
but
that
who
band
else is
went.
going to do that, Charles? Who else? Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right.
It would be self indulgent, but who else is going to do it? No one else is going to do
Well,
it.
absolutely. In terms of how they went, how they were received, because this is the big home city gig for a band that whose album actually topped some polls as the best album of the year it was released, which was either last year or the year before. The years start to blur a little bit. Um, how were they treated by
said
the
said the
Leeds
85-year-old Charles
audience?
Hutchinson.
Yeah.
Said the 85-year-old Charles Hutchinson. Oh yes, it's all just blending into one. Can you get me like a cup of tea, please? Uh, it went down well. It
Yeah.
made me think they could have been on a better slot because they were on about 1 o'clock or something like that. They could
Mm,
have easily been at 5 or 6 o'clock when things get even busier,
yeah.
and they would have gone down well because they're a much more outgoing, entertaining, proper live band than they were at first. Although they've still got elements of artiness and surrealism, they're more like a sort of like Yorkshire. I was going to say Yorkshire Jarvis Cocker, but yeah, obviously Jarvis is from Sheffield. But
Yeah.
Leeds and Sheffield, as you know, are very different. So they're basically it's Leeds version of punk, except for the modern day. They're not doing like Roxy Music inspired indie rock. They're more sort of
Mm.
like shambling dance, hip hop inspired post punk,
The fact that
slightly
they are
indie rock.
still playing a kind of 1 o'clock slot Is that something to concern them? That I mean, I don't know how. I mean, you've spoken obviously with James. He got a couple of words in while you lectured him, but and given, if you like, the media reaction to the debut album and the airplay that it got, and the huge number of gigs they played surrounding the release of that album, do Yard Act look like they'll have that moment, that to take that next step up?
I think it's a competitive world. Yeah, I don't think he seemed upset about that, but
no,
it's a competitive world, and
it is.
in being marginal these days, but cool, which used to get you somewhere, now doesn't get you as far. So Wet Leg were on at 4:45 p.m. in the main stage, and that's purely because they sold a hell of more records than Yard Act did. I mean,
Yes.
Yard Act's album probably sold about 70,000, and Wet Leg probably sold at least 100,000.
Yeah.
And they won a Grammy, blah blah blah. So they're big in the pecking order than Yard Act, and I don't know. I don't know if Yard Act will ever get up the pecking order. So I'm not sure that what they do is almost too intelligent for the times. So what goes down really well now is Fred Again. I mean, Fred Again's that electro British guy who's nominated for Mercury, who went down a storm at Glastonbury.
Yeah.
And Fred Again is just so, it's all big brushstrokes. It's all obvious stuff. It's all woe is me, but isn't life great? Oh, isn't life bad terrible? And there's no, apart from his choice of samples, which is interesting, there's no intelligence or anything to discover. There's nothing to get your hands on, and that's hugely, hugely popular. It's sort of like big emotions without any real depth to it is massively popular. And Yard Act are definitely not. They have more interesting ideas in one verse of one song than most acts have in a whole album. So they are a bit clever for their times.
Well, it was ever thus. I guess if you go back to a band like Devo, that would have been the case. And maybe their time comes on a revival later in life. I mean, that can happen. The appreciation for, I mean, that's a familiar path that is trodden by artists who actually put the art into artists, if you like. And
but in Devo's day, you could compromise, go more towards pop, and have hits. So when they did things like Whip It, that was a deliberate attempt to have a hit, and it worked.
Yeah. And a cover version.
If Yard Act deliberately simplified themselves to go more pop, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how far they could go to actually be successful, because to be big these days, you have to go all the way.
Yeah,
you have to.
Yeah,
exactly. You can't just compromise. You have to give your soul away musically, and I'm not sure if Yard Act will ever do that.
I mean, actually, that takes us back to the thoughts about Prefab Sprout, who I think released When Love Breaks Down. I think the record company released that at least 3 times. They re-released The King of Rock and Roll as well, I think, to try to make sure they were having hits. And the band, to some extent, did go along with that. I mean, and it does ask a lot of a band to sacrifice certain principles to chase the dollar.
Well, Paddy did King of Rock and Roll to be a hit. It was a parody of a hit, which turned out to be a huge hit. It's interesting that Martin McAloon, when he played that, and there was no demand for it, most of the fans there liked Swoon best of all, followed by Steve McKean. I mean, I like From Blankenford to Memphis. I think it's a great album. But when he played it, he refused to sing Hot Dog, Jumping Frog, Albuquerque. He just kept on replacing it with Get It On, Bang It Gun, Get It On. And it was funny the first time I did it, but then when he did it the whole song, I thought, oh, if he's that embarrassed by the song, why is he playing it? But Paddy probably told him to do that. Paddy probably said, like, play King of Rock and Roll, but if you're going to sing, don't sing Hot Dog, Jumping Frog, Albuquerque.
Well, it's the line that everyone remembers, of course. Now, Graham, Leeds Festival overall, last thoughts on Leeds Festival? I think they're already threatened to be announcing the first headliner for this next year already. Momentum is always there.
Well, it was absolutely mobbed, and the fact I'm complaining about not having enough indie white guitar bands doesn't get away from the fact it's still a great festival, and the world has changed, and maybe I should change a bit more as well.
Yeah, because you don't get a heavy metal day for cousin Ben Bolton anymore. That's for sure.
There wasn't that much punk pop or emo or stuff like that either.
No, exactly.
It was definitely drifting more towards the mainstream, but I guess they have to in current times.
Absolutely. Now, Graham, I feel it's time for an interruption before we look at a subject that I'm really looking forward to discussing. But just time, if you would, for an interruption, if anything fancies being given the interruption treatment.
Well, I don't like psychobabble. I realised what Fred again and acts like that actually represent. It's not like a new thing. It's not like a new way of thinking. The current sort of like Marianne Hobbs approach to like, yeah, that's great, yeah, and it all means everything, and you know, it's so revealing. And then you get to the sentence and she hasn't actually told you anything. And I think it's actually psychobabble, but it's so normal now that people don't call it psychobabble anymore. It's just a normal way of talking. So I like Little Sim's album, No Thank You, from last year. But there's a bit on the album sleeve which I find quite perplexing. So on the album sleeve of No Thank You by Little Sim, she says, "Emotion is energy in motion. Honor your truth and feelings. Eradicate fear. Boundaries are important." I've got absolutely no idea what that means. I can't see that actually means anything. It's just psychobabble.
Who is the greatest exponent in recent times of psychobabble, then, Graham? Who really gets your goat?
Well, they all do. It's what people, it's how people think and talk under the age of 50 or 40. It's just normal. So, you know, by me calling it psychobabble, I'm being grossly insulting to the majority of the population, quite frankly. But it's not just a new thing. It is an old thing. It's been around for a long time. And Robert Plant's about to tour again in November. The frontman of Led Zeppelin. His tour has been described as 5 musicians who have produced a supreme 90 minutes of music with considered interpretations of others' compositions, ensuring they present an innovative exploration of the song whilst maintaining their true essence. Furthermore, this odyssey has been undertaken in the spirit of appreciation, musicianship, and exaltation. They truly are a band of joy. And that all sounds good, but if you think about it, it tells you nothing. I've got no idea what Robert Plant's band sounds like from that. It's just whiffle waffle. So I think we're living a bit. You're either strongly annoyed by something or you're whiffle waffle now. There's nothing in between.
You were suggesting that maybe some of the modern day radio presenters fall into the psychobabble category. And we should just note that Steve Lamacq, who does not fall into that category, has just announced that after 18 years, he's standing down from his 6 music show. He's going to do a Monday show, just 1 show a week, to quote, spend more time with his family, which is usually a euphemism for, well, I've been asked to not do my show anymore and to go and they then say spend more time with my family. And there's someone who does not speak to psychobabble, but who has an enthusiasm for new music and discovery that belies any age that he might be, just as John Peel did exactly the same as well. But seems to me always to speak with absolute sense about the impact of music and why it still matters to him.
Yeah, I like him, but compared to John Peel, he is no John Peel. He's not as quirky. He's not as eccentric.
He's much more straightforward than John Peel.
He's more of a normal bloke. John Peel wasn't a normal bloke.
No.
But I did think at first, this is an excuse for getting a bit of the sack because of what you said about the spending time with the family. But he's been replaced by Hugh Stevens, and by no stretch of the imagination is Hugh Stevens that much different from Steve Lamacq. They're both cut from the same cloth. Fairly earnest, fairly straightforward, fairly blokey, generally love mostly indie guitar music. So since he's been replaced by someone quite similar, he probably hasn't.
So maybe he really is to spend more time with the family. And if so, Steve, enjoy the family.
Yeah, but I heard him the other night, and a lot of his show is old stuff. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff, there's a lot of old stuff. And the other night he said we've got new releases, excitingly, from Sprints and Divorce. And I thought, compare that to the 1990s when he was on the evening session with Joe Wiley. He'll be introducing new tracks by bands that sold 500,000 copies.
Exactly.
In the ITA News at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Sprints and Divorce, as good as they are, will never sell more than 60,000 copies of anything, and will never be in ITA News unless something very strange happens. So he's having to crank himself up after all these years to get enthusiastic about music, which he knows is never going to make a huge impact, having spent years pushing music that did have a huge impact. There's got to be somewhere in the back of his head that makes him feel like, why am I doing this? And I'm only guessing. I haven't got a clue what's really happened, but surely that must strike him as a bit odd that he's now having to get excited about music, which he knows can't possibly have any real impact.
From Britpop to what? Pap?
No pop.
No pop, exactly. Which leads us into, Graham, the last topic of the evening, and this is the public poll on the best album covers of all time. And I was asked at 2 minutes' notice, I was asked to go on to BBC Radio York to discuss this very topic, and so it didn't really give me any chance to do any research on it. I just kind of spoke off the top of my head, but that was fine. I think if it's the same poll that you're referring to, it has the Nirvana Nevermind album cover as the top of the chart.
That's the one.
The one with the baby and the floating dollar bill
on a fish hook.
Yeah, on a fish hook. And the first thing to think about this, I think, is we've come back to an age where suddenly vinyl is reviving, and maybe at the same time that is going to help artwork still be really important, because if we're just in this age where music is listened to on the ether, and you don't keep records anymore, you don't store vinyl, you don't store CDs, you don't whatever, so the artwork has reduced in its significance in principle, that is. So in some ways it has to be a celebration of the past, but actually there's still sufficient album sales with artwork involved to be, I think, important. An album, the revival of the 12-inch design, that beautiful design required for vinyl, maybe will help the album sleeve still be important.
Charles, you may say that, but the interesting point is this. Although the top 10 only has one recent entry, and I use the word recent advisedly, so the most recent album in the top 10 is Gorillaz' Demon Days, which is about 20 years old, which of course is a cartoon pastiche of the Beatles' Let It Be. All the rest is like Dark Side of the Moon, Aladdin Sane, Sgt. Pepper, which I think is the best album cover of all time. It's all predictable stuff. But what's interesting about the top 25 albums as picked by 2,000 British music lovers for a poll conducted by Perspectives Global, to cover all my bases there. The ones that are in the top 25 are from an era where these acts do not sell many hard copies, where they're streamed in their multi-millions. So the top 25 also includes Taylor Swift, which I find quite surprising, because which Taylor Swift fans care about album covers?
None.
Apparently some must do. Stormzy, again, the same thing. And then you got Beyonce, Amy Winehouse, Katy Perry. So the top 25 isn't just all your old 60s, 70s, 80s legends. There's a lot of recent stuff. So
that is a surprise to hear, isn't it? What would you read into that? Just because those albums have sold well? So they're freshly in people's mind?
It means either the streaming audience also looks at album covers, or a certain percentage of fans of current acts do actually still buy the albums they want as an album in physical format, not just digitally. Otherwise, why would they be there? I can't imagine that your 65-year-old Beatles fan or your 55-year-old David Bowie fan is like buying Taylor Swift and Stormzy and Katy Perry albums. Obviously, I'm making a gross assumption there. So yeah, it can only mean that.
So we're running out of time. If we've just got 1 second to say my favourite album cover.
What is it?
London Calling by The Clash. London Calling by The Clash.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.